Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Buff Show. Today we have me, Peyton Anderson, Evan Larson,
Cade Kerrigan.
and Cade. So today this is going to be a good one. We're going to go over the top 5 things to look out for when you're buying a home. So like anytime I'm out there showing buyers or Ben or Cade, a lot of buyers are just so infatuated with the house that they're blinded by, maybe some of the future expenses.
These are more of some of the big things, the big ticket items you look at right off the get-go.
Yeah, so that you're aware what you're getting before you put it under contract, because these are things that you should be aware of when you're making that first offer, not after you already have it under contract and you're doing the inspection and then you're like, oh crap, it needs a new roof. Or
a pre-offer inspection almost.
Yeah.
You really want to keep an eye out for these.
So this is just a quick guide for when you're going through houses, what to look out for.
So let's start electrical, right? That's a little bit scary for everyone. Knob and tube wiring, that's a big one to look out for. You can see them in crawl spaces, in unfinished basements, attics, if you can peek up into an attic. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard to see, but it's just single wire run through a lot of insulators through attics and stuff. You'll be able to recognize that. It still works fine, but it will fail eventually, and it is kind of scary. No main disconnect. So that means when you go out to your meter on the outside of your house, you'll see a glass bulb. If there's just a little tiny metal box around of it, there's no disconnect. Disconnect to be a breaker outside by your main meter or a handle, a disconnect shut-off switch. That's good because if you ever have to work on your panel, you want to be able to shut that off so it's dead from there in. On those older ones, you still have power in the house, so it's really hard to work on anything or replace anything. Another big one is old panels. So a really bad one to look at is called the Federal Pacific panel. They've actually had a recall on them, and a lot of lenders will actually have issues lending on a home if this panel is in there. That's the only one that we really know of that has a recall and some bad juju for causing fires because the breakers wouldn't trip. Mm-hmm. Another one that has a bad rap but doesn't have a recall is also a Challenger panel. And an undersized service. So basically, you want to make sure your house has enough juice to operate. A lot of times you see these older homes, they're only had 100 amp services. I've even seen some that have a 50 amp service. Right now, your minimum service is 125, and that's for like a townhome. You'll see a lot of people adding on to these smaller homes, barns, shops, different things like that, so you can undersize really fast. So
The biggest thing about undersizing a service without a main disconnect is if you pull more power than what's there, you're going to overheat the wires and nothing will trip going to the house, causing your wires to overheat, which leaves you at risk of a fire hazard and all stuff like that. So
a little story time on that, because my brother bought a house in Ogden and he did a big remodel, and when he was trying to work on the wires, they would just snap.
brittle,
Yeah.
got heated up.
Yeah. So he's like, crap, well, I guess I need to rewire the whole house. Didn't realize that. But and it's very common. You'll go into a house, you'll see what's common, like 50, 60 amp service.
60 amp on an older home is super common, yeah.
And so you'll have a house with a 60 amp service, and they'll have an electric dryer, an electric range, an AC unit that they added out, because a lot of these homes didn't have ACs back in the day. So you add an electric dryer, an electric range, and an AC, and if you have those running at the same time,
You're pulling more than 60.
Pulling more than your whole house can handle.
yeah, and then
Hot tubs and stuff like that, too.
yeah, and you could be heating up your wires,
main.
frying them. So that's just something to keep an eye out. Another thing I want to bring up: aluminum wiring.
Yep, aluminum wiring. And ungrounded receptacles.
Yeah,
Super common.
So you see a lot of two-pronged receptacles with that third hole. A lot of older homes back in the day, they just wired different. And,
well, and a lot of the wiring just didn't have a ground.
yeah.
Anything older than what, the 50s probably just didn't have a ground.
50s, 60s, just depends right when that code change came out.
So I think I have rentals that it's copper wiring, no ground, and there's you can mitigate that fairly easy. I don't think
GFIs and different things
GFIs,
like that.
but for me the bigger stuff is knob and tube, because that's almost a full rewire. Aluminum wiring, that's another tricky one because it's just expensive to go into. And then if you start telling insurance carriers and lenders hey, we have knob and tube or we have aluminum, then you're getting flagged there too. So if a house has those things, just be prepared that it's not a super simple fix.
No, and it's hard. It's not the fun stuff to look at. It's not the exciting stuff. It's not the
Yeah.
cabinets, the carpet, the paint, the whatever, But this is the type of stuff that'll come back and bite you in the butt later on down the road.
It's like my brother, like he didn't know, like, and you would never know until you started actually working on the wires and they just started snapping. But he's like, I can't work on these. Like
Right.
they just break. So yeah,
So next we got plumbing. Ideally, you want to look for copper and PEX tubing. So copper is just going to be a copper color tube. And then PEX tubing is going to be like your white, your blue, and your red flexible plastic type material tubing. Anything of those two is newer, ideally, and is going to last and function much better. There is a type of plumbing. It's called polybutylene, and it's a gray flex tubing, and it was installed anywhere from 78 to 95, and they actually had a big recall and a big lawsuit on these. So after about 10 years, this polybutylene got old and it got brittle, and it would crack and break and cause lots of water leaks. So they had a lawsuit on it, and if the tricky part of it is we're out of that range now. So you had 16 years to actually get that replaced if there was a leak, but it had to be 16 years after installation. So we're past the lawsuit now, so you can't get it replaced and be reimbursed for the cost of that. So it's kind of tricky now. If you're going into a house and you go into like mechanical room and you find like the water heater and stuff like that, look at the plumbing that's going into it. If it's a gray flexible tube, you need to be pretty careful and pretty cautious. I would walk the house, look underneath sinks, cabinets, look anywhere you can find open plumbing. Sometimes there's unfinished spaces in the basement, the garage, stuff like that, where you can see if there's any signs of water damage. If the tubing hasn't leaked by now, there's a chance it might not, but it's still going to be brittle and old, and it's still a pretty high risk of causing a leak at some point.
the other one that I think worth throwing in there is the galvanized plumbing.
Galvanized.
Because like anytime I'm looking at a property, if it has copper, I'm like sweet, or PEX, I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
But like polybutylene and galvanized, those two are what cause concern for me. Because like we did a remodel on a house in Bountiful, and we cut out the galvanized plumbing, and it's just like an artery. Like
Chokes.
it chokes off, and like the hole can be like just tiny, even though it's a thick pipe, and like full of rust and stuff. So like if you
and calcium deposits and everything
yeah,
else.
so if you don't use it that much and you turn on a faucet, like your water's just dirty.
Gross.
Yeah.
Another thing to look out for on that galvanized is a lot of people like to replace what they can see and touch. So you'll have all new PEX pipe, but you want to get up see where it penetrates your floors into your ceiling or into your sinks and bathrooms and stuff, because you'll actually see them run that PEX and then hook the galvanized for like the last 3 feet. So it's still better, but you still different things you can look for and ask about just to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck.
Yeah. So if you do have copper PEX, I mean those are your best too.
Another thing kind of going on with copper, cast drain.
Yeah.
So that black, it looks like a frying pan, the old school frying pans. Same thing, those corrode from the inside. Roots can penetrate them. You know that you want a poly, not a poly, a PVC.
Yeah. Or the ABS.
ABS. Yeah,
ABS.
that's a black plastic.
Yeah, that's
So-
the ideal. And then obviously once you get a house under contract, you can dig into the sewer and see what that looks like. But that's not something you can see when you're first looking at it. The third thing to watch out for when buying a home is your HVAC system, basically your mechanical system. The furnace, how old is it? An average lifespan of a furnace is like 15 to 20 years. An AC unit, that's a unit outside. Those probably about the same, 15 to 20 years. Some of the older systems, there was an R22 refrigerant that did a complete phase out of manufacturing in 2020. You can still get it, but it becomes very hard and expensive to get. So sometimes it's just better to replace the whole system and get a new condenser out there. So a new furnace and AC system, I mean, that can be fairly expensive. And if your furnace doesn't have AC, like let's say you have a swamp cooler or something like that, and you really want AC, like running new set lines and stuff for the
And the electrical.
condenser
Can be expensive.
is expensive. So
Mm-hmm.
just looking at that, like if that's a must-have on your list, I would factor in a decent, budget for adding that or switching that out. The nice thing is the HVAC, like your furnace, and if it does have an AC, you can always get a home warranty, and that will cover those components if you feel like it's close to going out. I guess another mechanical part would just be your water heater. That kind of falls under plumbing as well. But just watching that, those typically last about 10 years. So those you're switching out more frequently. But
Well, and another thing to look at too is if it doesn't have AC, is that furnace compatible to add an AC? Because some won't allow a condenser to be added to them. So
yeah,
if that's something you're like, oh, a quick add, if it's $5-6 to add a condenser and an AC. Well, if your furnace isn't compatible, now you're $20,000.
so, and I guess here's another, this is unique. You don't run into this very often, but I have run into it where you don't have an HVAC system. You have radiant heat.
I've got a house right now listed, no no
Yeah.
furnace and stuff.
Yeah. And then they just have like window coolers or the ductless splits. Like my house that we bought, it didn't have a furnace at all. It was radiant heat that
In
was
Eden?
dead. Yeah.
Okay.
So we had to add that. And to add that whole thing, we added it in the attic, and then we had to run gas. It didn't have a gas line to it either. But I think the furnace, like that whole system was like close to $15,000, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably cheaper because you had your whole house open and
I
tore
did.
apart.
I
you
did.
know?
But I just closed a house in North Ogden too. They only have radiant heat, and there's no duct work. So I'm like, that's something you have to think about. Like if you want it to be cool in the summertime, there's no way to just naturally cool your whole house.
Sometimes those older houses, though, they'll have super thick, concrete or cinder block walls, and so that'll help with insulation as
Yeah.
far as keeping it cool. But definitely no way to naturally cool it.
Yeah, so just keeping an eye out for that. Like, what is the mechanical system like? Is it a boiler? Is it in-floor heat? Is it a furnace? Obviously, furnace and AC is like your most common, typical one. But I think people that are used to that and then they go buy a house with radiant heat, like they could be dying in the summertime because they don't have the cooling.
Cool it down.
Yeah, yeah. And you can get those ductless splits, but that only cools the area that's in. So it's not cooling a big area. So yeah, just keep an eye out for those. Those are big things. People will love the house, the area, but they won't compute like, oh, but what about AC or this or that, or how easy is it to add it? Those are things you need to be asking yourself.
So the next thing we kind of look at, and this one's a big one, is your structural, as far as your foundation and settling and stuff of your home. You want to look for big cracks and shifts in like your mechanical rooms, anywhere you can see exposed foundation on the inside of the home if you can. Outside of the home, as you walk around, look for cracks, shifting, settling. But one of a good indicator on settling is you go into a home and you'll actually see large cracks in the sheetrock on corners and different, I guess it would be beams and parts of the wall where the trusses and stuff are moving on the other side of the sheetrock. So you might see patch jobs and different things like that, or new fractures that kind of go a distance.
I've seen a lot of like right above windows where you have the header and you'll have like a crack in the sheetrock there. You can see that, or like in the corners,
Or
and then
in-
you'll see people caulking it,
Yep.
and you're like, huh.
And in the masonry outside too, you'll see cracks, following grout lines and stuff, starting to separate a little bit.
And to have some settling, I think, is natural,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, especially in your older homes, you're going to see signs of settling.
Yeah, but big signs of settling,
Yes.
like you want to be aware of in the floor too. Like you can feel it a
feel
lot.
it when you walk in. It's
Yeah.
like sloped, and if you can feel it walking in, it's a
Right.
significant amount.
Because
So,
that's the structural aspect of it. It's not just a cosmetic crack and stuff that you seal up.
Right.
You have strength issues in the house this is on the dramatic side, but a catastrophic failure of like a roof or a wall or something like that.
and they can be expensive to fix. Me and Peyton actually worked a deal in Salt Lake. We had a client who purchased a home that was over 100 years old, and we had a foundation guy come out and look at the house because we knew it had settled, and it had settled 6 inches in the back, and they still wanted to move forward with the purchase, and so we got bids on what it would take to fix that, and it was $8,000 per pylon, and there was 4 pylons per corner, so 2 corners of 4 pylons each would have been like $64,000. Now his dad's a general contractor and all this type of stuff, so he was super confident that him and his dad could fix it, but it can get really expensive. And
Yeah.
And sometimes not even fixable. Sometimes you're just SOL.
yeah, and the biggest thing on a home that old is it could have settled and been done, or it could still be moving, and that's
Yeah.
the big question I think we're trying to figure out.
Well, and there's good companies that can come out and evaluate it for you, measure it, and then they can come back out a year or two later and evaluate it. But a lot of these are done when people are trying to buy and sell and switch owners, which makes it harder because you're trying to decide if you're wanting to buy something that is, either moving or was moving or something like that, and you're trying to figure out how big of a deal it is.
And remember, all the stuff we're talking about is we're pre-offer right now. These are the things you want to check and contemplate when you're making that offer.
Right.
And timeline in your offer as well. Do I need to get specialists out here?
Yeah.
So.
Before you're in love with the house, like just have all this while you're evaluating the area and the house. And if you like it, like look at some of these bigger items as well. But some of my favorite houses while we're talking structural are the brick ones because you can see like brick has zero forgiveness on movement. And so if you have a brick house and there's like hardly any cracks, it's looking pretty good.
Structurally pretty sound.
But sometimes you'll get the stair-stepping cracks, and that's fairly common as long as they're not huge. Like you'll get some cracking. If it's like straight vertical crack and cracking through bricks, that's a big deal. We have a house listed, and they have some vertical cracks through some brick. And we had Davenport come out and look, and it was just brick veneer. So obviously there was movement there. This was just on their garage side. But then when you would go on the inside of the garage and look at the framing, everything was tight and like there wasn't huge gaps and stuff. So their recommendation was like just keep an eye on it. But again, it's still going to be a challenge when like working with other buyers and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I guess one other thing on structural is termites because like a lot of people don't realize, but there's a lot of termite mounds and colonies, I guess is what you call them in Utah. They're all subterranean, so they live in just under the ground, in the earth. But
Meaning you're not seeing giant mounds out and about.
Right. But you'll see they'll wreak havoc on some houses.
Oh yeah.
Like the inspector we work with a lot, he shared some photos of this house. It was like a $2 million house, more like a newer build, like within the past like 5 years, and one of their beams like had been eaten away. Yeah. And we've had them in our rentals. Luckily, they're fairly easy to get rid of. And most of the damage I see isn't like catastrophic, but I think sometimes you can if you let it go long
I
enough.
was gonna say, I think it's the duration on which you catch it and evaluate it. So
you remediate it.
Yeah.
So lastly is the exterior of the property. The roof is a big one. Your asphalt and shingle roofs are anywhere from 15 to 30 years. You want to look at the exterior of the home, like siding, the brick, like Peyton's talked about, stuff like that. You want to see if there's any like rotting on it from water damage, or if there's cracking or gaps in the wall, does it cause some water damage on the inside of the exterior of the home. And then the windows, your average lifespan of your windows is anywhere from 15 to 20 years. If they are the metal framed windows, which was super common in the older homes, you want to make sure they're still sealed off and they haven't warped too bad on the outside. And then also if it's a newer double pane window, you want to make sure there's no fogging on the window, there's no moisture on the inside between the two panes.
The nice thing about windows is, unlike the roof, like if your roof is bad, it's going to cause a lot of damage. If your windows are bad, like you might pay a little bit more in utility bills.
you can last for a day or a year or two.
Yeah. Well, even like I have rentals that they have the original windows, like they're 70 years old. You know,
I actually called BS on the whole window aging lifespan thing.
I
I was like,
Googled it.
oh yeah, look at that. It's just the glass guys out here trying to get rich on us.
well,
but like he was saying, the old single pane windows, like on the stuff, they're just a solid window. But we have these really nice argon filled windows and the double panes, and you start getting bugs, and it's more of a nuisance and an efficiency thing necessarily than a functionality thing. But
Well, and if you like seeing out your windows, like if that seal
bad
breaks,
enough.
it just fogs, and then you can't see out of it.
Little
which is
water
annoying.
droplets and
Yeah. And then the roof, like one thing I want to bring up there is not only like how old the roof is, like if it's been done within the past few years, that's awesome because roofs are expensive to do. But there's a lot we could talk about roofs. The biggest things is how many layers of shingles does it have? Because you'll see a lot of companies come in, they'll overlay over the original ones because it saves money. But that actually, like roofs are meant to breathe and have some heat transfer. The thicker the shingles get, you stacking on top of each other, it actually diminishes their life by quite a bit.
Yep.
I don't know the exact numbers, but like having 2 layers of shingles, that next layer that you just laid on is going to last, 20% less or 30% less time just because they're not installed the way they should be.
and most all like reputable roof companies and stuff that are relaying shingles will only do 3 layers.
Right.
We just did my grandmother-in-law's, built their house back when the dinosaurs were around. But it was like 7.5 layers.
Are you serious?
Jeez.
They
It
just
was
kept going.
insane. I
That
mean, it
is-
was,
Mm.
but
I don't know how a roof like that could ever leak, I guess, though.
well, what's funny is it was the penetrations and stuff. That's
Really?
another thing to kind of watch for on your roof. Are they sealed correctly? Did
Yeah.
Joe Blow Schmo climb
Nail
up there
them
and just
down,
throw
right?
on stuff and didn't, flash and wrap all the penetrations where your plumbing
Yeah,
and stuff
that's
comes
true.
out? So
One, it's probably weight too. Like you add
Yeah.
7
Oh, yeah.
layers or 3 layers, like whatever it is, that's a lot of
and,
weight
And
too.
every time you run another thing else through, you have
More penetration.
more penetrations into your. Back then they didn't have even used tar paper, but
Yeah.
your water and ice and different things in your roof, you're penetrating your plywood even more. So it does weaken stuff.
One thing to look for with the roof, a good, easy, quick sign to know if your roof's lifespan's coming towards the end is your shingles start to warp up. They start to,
Cupping.
they start to cup upward. And so if you start seeing shingles that are cupped, just know that
Well,
the lifespan's getting towards the
And
end.
another tip too, we just did an inspection. I had our inspector. He walked us out and showed us the roof on your asphalt shingles and stuff. Right on the edges, he said it'll almost look shiny or like a white
Yeah.
fabric coming
Mhm.
out. It's kind of an
Some
indicator,
fiberglass.
That's a good.
an indicator that you're coming to the end of your lifespan. So
That's good to know.
So one other thing on the roof, because I've run into this a few times, where a roof needs to be redone, and if they had the wood slats and they didn't have plywood on,
oh yep,
and if you're going to replace that roof, most roofing companies, they're like, you have to resheet the whole roof.
Mm.
Now, I don't know why.
out of probably just out of danger or the methods we use nowadays. It's just not a good.
Yeah. Maybe the shingles were, I don't know.
Well,
but
I don't know what like my grandmother-in-law's that we just did last month. They did it, but
Did they?
I think it also depends on the quality and or the
How-
gap,
Yeah.
and they may or may not warranty stuff. So
Well, and we did a house in Bountiful. It was like a flip house, and it had just the slats. They're like 1x6s, just lined the roof, and I guess we could have gone over that. But if you think about it, if there's an inch gap somewhere and you step on it weird, or if something pokes it, it's going to poke right through the shingle. So we actually kept those on, and we sheeted the whole roof
right over it.
right over it. But still, that was a ton of money in sheeting.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, especially with lumber nowadays. I mean, it's
Everything's
Yeah.
expensive.
And an agent in our office, he just ran into that where I think they had the cross slats, the horizontal slats, and the roofers were like, you're going to have to sheet it. So it just depends, but keep an eye out for that stuff. Another thing is like the tar and gravel roofs, like those were invented and meant to last forever. You could just get up there and add more tar and then gravel and let it go. And they do last a long time, but there is a lot of maintenance there. And those were on like flatter pitched roofs. So, and to pull those off, I've never actually had to pull one off. I have a house that had a tar and gravel roof, and then they had a company just come over and do a membrane roof over the tar and gravel. I think they did like a foam layer and somehow secured that to the tar and gravel to go over. I'm sure it was a cheaper option, but just keep an eye out for those as well. Tar and gravel, your membrane roofs, metal roofs are another thing just to look out for. They're nice. They keep everything off the roof, but then it can pile it up against the house. So there's a lot of things just to look out for. But These are the main things. Like when you're walking through a house, if you can get a good, like these 5 things, the electrical, plumbing, HVAC, structural, and the exterior, if you can kind of do a quick overview of those, what components do they have, how's it looking, that will give you a good indication on where to offer, what your future expenses are going to be like, and how much this house will cost you down the road. And it's very unlikely every house will have all of these 5 things perfect. You know, you're probably going to run into 1 or 2 issues on
Every home.
yeah,
Don't run away just because you see problems. Just be aware and informed.
right. Well, awesome, guys. Anything else you want to throw in there on this?
I think that's it.
Nope. Do your due diligence
Yeah.
before and after.
Yeah, this is doing your due diligence before you even get
An
it.
offer accepted.
Yeah.
It's always easier when you make an initial offer to say, hey, look, here's what we've got, here's what we see, this is why we're offering, instead of getting someone under contract high and then trying to beating them the price down and out of them.
When you only have one shot to really like get the price down, and so if you're going at it already, like you get the house under contract and then you knew it needed a new roof, but you didn't ask for it up front, like you kind of lose all your negotiating power that you could have had before.
Now you've just you pissed someone off.
Right.
So
So anyways, well, hopefully this is helpful for you guys, and till next time.